The rain fell softly, incessantly, when I parked in front of a roadside hotel in the interior of Paraná. It was late at night, and the highway seemed forgotten by the world. The lights on the facade flickered as if struggling to stay on, like the place was pleading to be avoided. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment, staring at the building. Small, with old and worn-out architecture, it seemed to have stopped in time. A red neon sign, with some letters flickering, announced the name Hotel Estrela do Sul. The word Estrela blinked irregularly, as if it were sending a silent warning. The sound of the rain on the car's roof was hypnotic, but it didn't drown out the slight shiver that ran down my spine. Still, I grabbed my backpack and ran to the reception. The door creaked as it opened, and I was greeted by a strong smell of damp wood mixed with something subtler. Perhaps mold. Perhaps something I preferred not to identify. The lobby was empty. An old bell rested on the dark wooden counter, scratched by time. I rang it once. The metallic sound echoed through the space as if it were traveling down hallways I hadn't yet seen. Shortly after, an elderly woman appeared from a side corridor, her steps slow, her gaze lost somewhere behind me. "Good evening," she said in a voice almost lifeless. "A room?" I nodded, and it was only when she handed me the key, a heavy bronze piece with the number 7 engraved, that I realized. The hotel was too cold for a summer night. Cold, silent, and empty. The sign, worn out, read only, Hotel Paraíso. But the structure was anything but paradisiacal. An old building, covered in moss, with windows that seemed like eyes closed long ago. I was exhausted. I rang the reception bell. The sound echoed longer than usual. I stood there, frozen, my hand still near the bell, as if any movement could break the strange suspension of the place. The echo of the ring seemed to have infiltrated the walls, traveling through hallways that perhaps no longer even existed. Behind the counter, a tattered curtain swayed slightly, but there was no wind. I waited. I was about to ring the bell again when a figure emerged from the shadows. A thin man of average height, wearing an old suit, slightly crooked at the shoulders. His eyes were too deep, and the smile he offered didn't reach the rest of his face. "Room?" he asked bluntly, as if the words cost him effort. I nodded. He turned without saying anything else, grabbing a key that hung alone from a rusted hook. He handed it to me with cold fingers and looked for a second too long at my backpack, as if trying to guess its weight, or its contents. "Third floor. Last room down the hall. Just..." He hesitated, his lips moving before deciding not to continue. "Good night." I climbed the stairs slowly, the floor creaking under my feet as if each step had its own voice. There were no other sounds. No distant radio. No television hum. No noise from other guests. Only my heart, racing. When I reached the door to the room, the number was smudged, but the shape of the key slid in effortlessly. I turned the doorknob. The room smelled of closed-in time, old wood, and something sweet I couldn't immediately identify. Something out of place. I dropped my backpack on the floor and leaned against the door. For a moment, I wished I hadn't stopped there, but my tired body wouldn't let me leave. I threw myself onto the bed, and only then did I realize there were marks on the pillow, as if someone had just gotten up. A short man, with deep eyes and an empty expression, appeared without making a sound. "Room 12 is free," he said, without even asking my name. The key was left on the counter with a bony hand that trembled slightly. The metal made a sharp sound as it touched the wood, as if echoing more than it should. I paid in cash. He counted the bills slowly, ceremoniously, as if each note held a weight beyond the value printed on it. Then he smiled. It was the first time his face changed, but not for the better. The smile was strange, disconnected from the moment, as if rehearsed or borrowed from someone he once was. His eyes remained empty, as if the gesture was no more than a mechanical reminder of hospitality. I took the key without saying a word. The man remained motionless, watching, until I disappeared from the reception. When I looked back, he was no longer there. The hotel corridor was narrow, covered by a faded carpet, damp in some sections. The walls had dark stains that seemed to move with the weak light from the lamps. The doors were all the same, except for number 12, at the end of the hall. It seemed different. Not in appearance, but in sensation. As if the air around it was denser. I inserted the key into the lock, a dry, precise click. The room was small. A spring mattress covered by a yellowed sheet, a dresser with a fogged-up mirror, and an armchair pushed into the darkest corner. The curtains were closed, but the sounds from the street didn't exist. It was as if this place were outside of time, or outside the world. I dropped my backpack on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sank more than it should have. A slight creak responded to my weight. That's when I noticed. There was a painting, an old portrait of someone who might have been the hotel's owner. But the strange thing was that the man in the photo, short, with deep eyes, a faded smile, was the same one who had served me. Except the photo seemed to be dated at least 50 years ago. I climbed narrow stairs that creaked as if they were tired of existing. Each step seemed to complain under my weight, as if begging for rest. The corridor on the second floor was stuffy, with the air still and heavy, as if no one had breathed there in a long time. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, in ochre tones, torn in several places, revealing the dark, damp wood behind. Old portraits hung crookedly, their black and white faces disfigured by time. Some smiles were almost erased. Others had eyes too alive for something printed. The eyes followed me. With each step, I felt the gazes move with me, as if the paintings contained not memories but presences. It wasn't just an impression, it was a kind of silent awareness, contained in the corners and frames. I felt a shiver. A whisper ran down my neck. It wasn't sound, not really. It was a message I didn't hear, but understood. Something like, "You've returned." But I had never been there before. Or had I? My fingers tightened around the key in my pocket. It was the only cold and real thing amidst the suffocating heat of that corridor. I kept walking, trying not to look too much at the portraits, trying not to listen again to what hadn't been said. As I passed by door number 12, something inside me hesitated. A chill crawled beneath my skin. It was as if that door had been waiting for me. But I still wasn't ready to enter. Room 12 was the last one on the right. The doorknob was cold, as if it hadn't been touched in a long time, or as if something on the other side had stolen its warmth. I turned it slowly. The door creaked with a long lament, almost human. When I opened it, I was met with a sour smell of wet wood and something burnt, like a candle just blown out. An odor that can't be explained, but that carries memories of places we try to forget. For a moment, I had the feeling that I was invading something that didn't want to be found. The room was too simple. A wooden bed, with rough sheets and a pillow that looked as though it had never been used, or never changed. Beside it, a dark oak nightstand, with a dusty Bible resting like an abandoned object, more decorative than sacred. The curtain was thick, made of heavy fabric, and concealed the room's only window. The fabric didn't move, even with the wind I imagined coming from outside. The silence inside was so dense that I found myself holding my breath, just to avoid disturbing it. I closed the door behind me. The click of the lock echoed like a period. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sank under my weight, letting out a muffled sound like a sigh. My eyes fixed on the curtain. Something about it seemed wrong. It wasn't just the weight of the fabric. It was what it was hiding. I stayed there for a few minutes, listening to the sound of my own heart and nothing else. Then I got up and, slowly, pulled the curtain aside. The window faced a wall. A brick wall, pressed up against the glass, as if someone had built it there on purpose, to ensure no one could see what was inside, or to prevent something from getting out. The light flickered. Its weak glow trembled at irregular intervals, like a tired breath. When I closed the door, I felt a slight pressure in the air, almost imperceptible but undeniable, as if someone had just left, or entered. I stood still for a moment, my hands still on the doorknob, trying to understand that sudden weight. There was no sound, no wind, no movement, but something had changed. I tried to convince myself it was just fatigue. A long trip, hours on the road, my body asking for rest. But my body knew more than my mind was. The instinct throbbed subtly beneath my skin, like a silent alarm refusing to be ignored. I carefully placed my backpack on the floor. The zipper made a noise that seemed too loud in the suffocating silence. I looked around. The light continued to flicker. The smell of damp wood and burnt candle persisted, dense, almost tangible. I approached the nightstand. The Bible was still there, covered by a thin layer of dust. When I touched the cover, a cold sensation climbed up my arm. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe to distract myself, maybe hoping to find something. But inside, between the yellowed pages, was a folded sheet. Old paper, faded ink. Only one handwritten sentence. Do not stay after the third flicker. The light flickered once, then the second. I stood frozen, the paper trembling between my fingers more than I would have liked to admit. Then the light went completely out for 2 long seconds, and came back. The third. A dry click sounded by the doorknob turned slowly, by itself. The bathroom, the mirror was already fogged up even before I turned on the shower. The steam, thick and dense, seemed to have gathered before I even touched the water. I stood in front of it for a moment, watching the opaque glass and the blurry silhouette of my own reflection, as if something was already there, waiting. When the hot water hit, the sound of it falling onto the tiles was comforting, a noise that tried to anchor me in reality. But soon, marks appeared on the glass, like open palms, pressed against the other side, still invisible but impossible to ignore. I blinked. They were gone. The reflection returned to its original state, but something was wrong. The marks on the surface of the mirror made no sense. I was alone in there. There was no one in the bathroom, nothing but me and the hot water falling. The sound of the water, so constant, drowned out everything around, but something crept in, light and persistent, like a whisper. Almost inaudible, but there, very close, as if someone was whispering from the other side of the glass. My name. I stood still for a moment, trying to understand what was happening. The whisper intensified, lower, more urgent, as if the voice were getting closer. And then, in a sudden movement, the mirror fogged up again. It wasn't steam. It wasn't the water. It was a breath. I could see it, forming and disappearing on the glass, like an invisible presence, as if someone was truly there, on the other side. Not just an impression, but something more, something waiting to be revealed. With an instinctive step, I moved away from the mirror, and when my hand touched the doorknob, I heard the voice again. Now, clearer. You shouldn't be here. In bed, I tried to sleep. The rain was constant, a tranquil sound that should have calmed me, but something interrupted it. Footsteps, slowly dragged along the corridor. It was as if someone were walking there, moving with a strange effort, as if in no hurry, as if the sound of each step was measured and precise, coming closer. I lay still, eyes fixed on the door, my heart racing. Each step seemed heavier than the last. The sound echoed through the corridor walls, distorting with every indentation, as if the person were moving slowly, as if they were still there, even when the sound grew nearer. They stopped in front of my door. I held my breath, feeling the dense air around me. The darkness in the room seemed to swallow each of my movements. The weak ceiling light flickered again, once more fighting against the darkness that was overtaking the room. The doorknob turned slowly. The sound, soft and meticulously controlled, seemed to come from a place much deeper than I could imagine. The cold touch of the doorknob, the sound of metal moving with a terrifying slowness, as if it were an attempt to gauge my reaction, to calculate every second passing between the turning of the key and the possible impact of what could happen. It was locked. The door didn't open, but the feeling, the presence outside, pressed against the wood, waiting, remained. Still, something in the air was wrong. It wasn't just the sound of the footsteps or the touch of the doorknob. It was the sense that someone or something was waiting for me to make the next move. The weight of the presence was almost tangible. I could feel the tension in the space, as if it were something physically existing between us. The raindrops fell heavier on the roof, but the stillness in the corridor was complete. No voice, no sound of breathing. Just the sense that this being, or whatever it was was waiting for me to move. I knew that, somehow it knew I was there. And that made me wish I had never opened that door. After what felt like an eternity, the silence returned. But my sleep did not. The room was too heavy, the air dense and cold, as if something was still present, hidden in the darkness. I closed my eyes, trying to distance myself from the oppressive feeling, but sleep refused to come. The weight of the early morning was immense, and I only found brief relief when the first rays of light began to invade the room, tinting the curtain a pale gray. I woke up unrested, but with an irresistible impulse. Only at dawn did I cross the corridor again. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, and the feeling of being watched continued to haunt me. As I passed by room 12, the cold emanating from there made my body shiver. Something was wrong with that place, something I no longer wanted to uncover. In the reception, there was a woman in black. She was sitting behind the counter, immersed in a deep silence, her eyes red, as if she had been crying for days, yet her expression was relentless, almost mourning. When I approached, she slowly lifted her head, without surprise, as if she already knew I would come. "Good morning," she said, her voice as soft as the whisper of the wind outside. But there was something unsettling about her calmness. When I mentioned the sounds I had heard the previous night, she paled even more. Her face lost all color, and for a moment, it seemed as though the air around her grew denser, heavier. What did you hear?" she asked, her voice trembling, as if she were trying to control the panic that was about to overflow. I stood silent for a moment, unsure of what to say. The words seemed too small in the face of all that had happened. But she didn't wait. Her eyes, now lifeless, fixed on a point beyond me, as if the past were unfolding in her mind. "You shouldn't have stayed. You shouldn't," she murmured, almost inaudible. Then, she let out a heavy sigh that echoed in the stifling room. She turned to an old cabinet, pulling out an object covered by a thick cloth. When she revealed it, I saw it was a key. It was unlike the others. Old, with an irregular shape, almost handmade. "The key to room 12, she said, her eyes now fixed on my face, as if daring me to ask anything more. I didn't know if I should ask, but something in her gaze paralyzed me. She was no longer talking about me. She was talking about something else. Something that stretched far beyond that hotel. And before I could utter a word, she added, in an even lower voice, "Do not look for it. It already knows you are here. Room 12 shouldn't be rented," she whispered, her eyes fixed on some distant point, as if her own voice were a painful memory. "Since the fire, no one should go in there anymore." I was speechless, the weight of those words hitting me like a punch. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. I didn't know what to say. What does one say after hearing something like that? What she was telling me seemed like something out of a nightmare. With my heart racing, I managed to ask, almost without thinking, "What happened?" She hesitated. Her gaze became lost, as if she were trying to remember, or maybe wanting to forget. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, almost inaudible. "A couple. Burned alive, locked inside. They never found the cause. Just the screams echoing even after the fire went out." Those words hung in the air, the weight of those memories almost tangible. Screams, echoing, after the fire. The horror of that image made my breath tighten in my throat, as if the air were becoming thinner, heavier with every passing second. She didn't continue, but her red eyes, now as empty as the space around them, were fixed on me. There was pain in them, a profound sadness mixed with something else. Fear. Fear of something she knew, something she might have experienced but didn't want to face anymore. The silence dragged on for a few more seconds, until she looked at me one last time, with an expression that mixed pity and warning. "Don't go in there," she said, her voice now firmer, more urgent. "If you know what's good for you, leave now while you still can." I stood there, absorbing each word, each feeling she left in the air. The weight of her gaze continued to follow me as I moved away, but something inside me already knew. Room 12 had more than story. It had something that was still there, something that wasn't just an echo of the past. and I was getting closer to finding out. I wanted to laugh, deny it. I wanted to ignore what she had said, to think it was just a story, a made-up ghost tale to scare tourists like me. But something inside me already knew there was more to that story, more to that place, something that couldn't be explained. And the feeling that I wasn't alone in that hotel grew stronger with each passing moment. "I changed rooms," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "I want room 3, on the ground floor." She didn't say anything else. Her gaze, still heavy with a fear that seemed to come from another time, followed me to the reception. She handed me the key without another word, as if her will had been drained. I went to room 3. Smaller, but lighter, or so I thought. The walls were thinner, the space more claustrophobic, but the air seemed fresher, less heavy than room 12. I could breathe better there, even though the place was simple, lacking in charm. But there was one difference: the silence. At first it seemed pleasant, even comforting, like the sound of distant rain outside, tapping against the closed windows. But as the night deepened, the silence began to change. It was as if it became thicker there, denser. There was no sound of wind in the trees, no street noise. No, what I heard seemed to come from within the walls, as if the building itself were breathing, slow and deep, trying to stay quiet, trying to hide. Every time I moved, it felt like the room itself adjusted, settled around me. And the air seemed to grow heavier, as if something was waiting. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. The weight of the presence in the room wasn't just the shadow of the past. It wasn't just the echo of a fire. It was something more. Something that was there, watching, waiting. The sensation was so strong that, for a moment, I thought I was hearing soft breaths, coming from somewhere dark, near the door. But when I looked, there was nothing. The silence became an impossible weight to bear. It was no longer comfortable. It was suffocating. I went to the window and opened it. The sound of the rain was like an escape, something to remind me that the world was out there. But even with the window open, the feeling of claustrophobia didn't dissipate. Something was inside that room, and I didn't know what it was. I only knew that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I woke up to the sound of the television. Not mine. It was a soft hum, but unbearably present, filling the silence of the early morning. Strange. I hadn't turned on the TV, and the sound didn't seem to be coming from my room. I got up, confused, trying to shake off the feeling that something was out of place. I walked up to the hallway, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor, and soon found myself standing in front of room 12's door. It was slightly open. That gave me a chill, but I couldn't stop myself. The impulse to investigate, to understand what was going on, was stronger than the fear. The television buzzed, the static breaking the silence with an insistence that made everything even more unsettling. I pushed the door open with a hesitant motion, and as I stepped inside, I froze for a moment. It was the same room from the night before. The bed was made, the curtains were drawn, the nightstand intact, the Bible still there, covered in dust. The room seemed unchanged, untouched, still, as if time hadn't moved since I had left it. But the mirror, the one I had seen fogged up that morning, was now perfectly clear. And it reflected something the room didn't I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't shadows or distortions, but a shape, a presence that formed before me on the glass, as if someone were standing right behind me, looking through the reflection. But when I turned around, there was nothing. The room was empty. The figure in the mirror wasn't mine, but something I recognized from somewhere. It was there, with an expression I couldn't understand or decipher. Something between anguish and anger. But the worst part wasn't the shape or the presence. It was what I felt as I looked at it. I wasn't alone in the mirror. Something, or someone, was inside it, waiting, watching. I felt the air grow heavier, and then, as if it were an instinctive reaction, my hand moved toward the mirror. When my finger touched the cold surface of the glass, it vibrated slightly, as if something behind it had reacted to the touch. But before I could pull away, An image appeared in a sudden burst of light and shadow. It was the same image, but now vivid. The couple, burned, their bodies unrecognizable, but their hands still visible, reaching out as if they were trying to grasp. A scream, which I didn't hear but felt deeply, ran down my spine. I fell back, hitting the wall. The door slammed shut behind me, and the TV's hum faded away. I stood there, trembling, breathing uncontrollably, trying to understand what had just happened. But the feeling was clear. Room 12 wasn't just marked by the past, it was alive, and it was watching me. A woman. Her reflection appeared in the mirror, distant at first, like a shadow, but soon the form became clear. She was dressed in a long, burned dress, the flames seemingly having devoured much of the fabric, leaving only charred fragments. Her skin was darkened, marked by the scars of a fire that didn't seem willing to release her. But what froze me in place were her eyes, deep, empty, as if they carried all the pains of an immense and silent suffering. She was staring at me, not with anger, but with something darker, something I couldn't define. It was a presence, a weight that settled in the space between us, something that wasn't limited to that image reflected in the mirror. I was frozen, unable to look away. The fear was dense, almost palpable, but there was something more, something inexplicable that kept me there, watching. Then, suddenly, without me realizing any change, the figure vanished from the reflection. I blinked, and she was no longer there. When I turned around, the room was empty. There was no one anywhere. But the smell of burning. It filled my lungs with such force that it made me cough, as if the very air was saturated with smoke from a fire still fresh. It was dense, suffocating, and it seemed to be coming from inside the walls, as if the hotel itself was burned from within. I tried to breathe deeply, but the smell grew stronger with every passing second. It spread throughout the room, filling every corner, every empty space until it felt like the smoke was surrounding me, swallowing me whole. I looked around, trying to find some explanation, but there was nothing there except the shadows dancing on the walls, cast by the dim light of the flickering lamp. The woman, the figure, the fire, all seemed to be condensing into one place, into a single feeling that the room, that hotel, was not just a refuge. It was a prison, and something else, something deep and ancient, was still there, waiting, watching. The sound of breathing in my ears was what snapped me out of my momentary paralysis. It wasn't mine. I wasn't alone. I ran out. Fear pushed me forward, my legs struggling to keep up with the urgency of my thoughts, but still, I couldn't stop. Each step down the stairs seemed longer, more endless. The wooden steps creaked under the weight of my run, as if the hotel itself were revolting against my escape. I could hear my own heart pounding in my chest, so loud that it seemed to mix with the distant sounds, as if something were following me, something I didn't want to see, didn't want to understand. The staircase seemed to never end. I descended in desperation, the shadows around me coming to life, stretching, almost as if they were trying to pull me back. The light above me flickered frantically, and the air was heavy, thick with a stifling heat that made the escape even more suffocating. When I finally reached the ground floor, the reception door was right there, closer than I could have imagined, but not close enough to escape the feeling that the hotel wouldn't let me go. The woman was waiting downstairs. She stood still, motionless, like a statue of mourning. Her figure hunched by the same pain that seemed to stretch across time. Her red eyes locked on me as soon as I stepped into the hallway. But now, there was something different, something deeper, more penetrating. As if she knew exactly what I was experiencing. As if she already knew my soul had been touched by the weight of that memory. She didn't move as I approached, but when I spoke, her words were faster than my own breath. "They know you saw." Those words hit me like stones, cold and heavy. Before I could ask, she leaned in, almost whispering in my ear. Her voice so soft it was hard to understand, but impossible to ignore. "Now, you belong to this memory too." I tried to swallow the fear, tried to understand, but her words echoed within me like an omen. The feeling of being trapped, of having seen something I shouldn't, now became mine, a part of me. Something terrible and eternal had marked me, and the hotel wouldn't let me leave. The sound of the door slamming shut behind me made me jump, but when I looked at the woman, she was simply watching, as if she were waiting for me to understand. "You can't run," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "There's nowhere to go." I got in the car and drove away without looking back. The door slammed with a bang, as if closing something much heavier than just a simple vehicle. I started the engine, and the sound of the car coming to life was a desperate attempt to push away the echoes of what I had left behind. But the rain, as if it knew what I felt, followed me to the next town. The glass was fogged, and I could hear the sound of the raindrops hitting the windshield, rhythmic, incessant, like a distant lament. My mind tried to drift away, but the images were there, persistent, behind my closed eyelids. Room 12. The mirror. The woman in the burnt dress. The silent screams of the couple, still echoing in the emptiness of that hotel. I knew something was wrong, something I couldn't explain, but somehow it had now become part of me, like an invisible scar. I was shaking. My hands, still sweaty, gripped the steering wheel tightly. The feeling that I had crossed into something beyond reality slowly consumed me. As if that place, that hotel, had been a border, a thin line between what is possible and what cannot be understood. I had crossed into a space where the laws of time and logic no longer applied. And even though I was far away, I knew it was still there. Something had stayed with me. Something that wouldn't let me go so easily. The road ahead seemed endless, the car's headlights illuminating only a small stretch of the path, while the darkness stretched around it, threatening, impenetrable. And no matter how much I tried to deny it, a part of me knew that hotel would not be the only place where I would find what I saw. That memory, that presence. It would follow me, wherever I went, wherever I hid. The rain grew heavier, and suddenly, I realized the sound of it on the windshield was no longer just rain. It was something more. Something like the sound of footsteps, slowly, dragging, as if someone were following me, still in my shadow, through the rain, the road, and the night. Months later, the need to understand what had happened consumed me. Something inside me wouldn't let me rest. The images of the hotel, the woman in the mirror, the muffled screams, were still very vivid, and I needed to know more, to understand what lay behind that place, that feeling that something far beyond reality was unfolding before me. I went in search of answers. I researched, scoured every corner of the internet, trying to find any trace, any indication that the hotel had truly existed. I went to Paraná, following the route I remembered with unsettling precision. But what I found was even more disturbing. There was nothing. No records, no photos, not even on Google Maps. When I searched for the name of the hotel, Hotel Paraíso, the search returned an empty result. The street where I remembered parking was there, but the hotel? Nothing. The place where I knew it had been, the address, no longer existed. No mention of it in any archives, no listings from owners, nothing. As if the place had been erased from all maps, as if it had never existed. The only thing I found was a blank space, as if the memory of the entire place had been absorbed by the earth itself, as if it had been swallowed by something much older, darker. The strangest thing of all was the sensation I had when I passed the area where the hotel should have been. The air felt different, dense, still heavy with an indescribable presence, as if something had been interrupted there, as if time itself had folded upon itself, and that piece of land was a scar in a world that should never have been touched. It was as if the hotel, or whatever it represented, had existed only in a gap between the real world and something much older, deeper. Something that hid in the shadows between the lines of time. Something that knew I had seen it and was now calling me back. But the question that wouldn't leave my mind was, why me? I wanted to deny what I felt, but deep down, I knew that this had not been an accident. I had not just visited the hotel. I had crossed a line, and now something else was following me. Something that had no end. But the marks remained. It wasn't just the memory. It wasn't something that faded with time. There was no way to escape. During the weeks that followed, The nightmares became more frequent. They began to infiltrate my dreams in an insidious way, as if the hotel was still there, waiting, hidden in the shadows of my mind. In the nightmares, I was back in room 12. The doors creaked, as if the building itself were trying to keep me trapped, as if every board and every wall wanted to absorb me back into that place. The mirror, always the mirror, reflected eyes that were not mine, eyes that watched me, empty and hungry. I tried to scream, but there was no sound. I tried to run, but the room seemed to stretch, to expand, and the door was never within reach. The smell of burning, that dense and suffocating smell, mixed with the air, making every breath heavier, harder. I wake up with my heart racing, sweating, with the feeling that I'm still trapped there, in the dark, deep in that room. Sometimes, I'm not sure if I'm awake. The feeling of being trapped, of being pulled back, of reliving that night again and again, is so strong, it's almost tangible. Every time I close my eyes, I feel the pressure of that environment, as if I'm falling again, as if I'm being dragged back to that place where time doesn't exist, where the laws of reality bend. There are moments when I look into mirrors unwillingly, unable to avoid it, and something inside me stirs. I know what's reflected there is not my reflection. It's no longer just my image. I see eyes watching me, and I know they're not just mine. And if I look more closely, I can almost hear the heavy breathing of something hiding, waiting for the moment to return. I tried to escape, I tried to move on, but the hotel is still inside me, and no matter how hard I try to ignore it, I know it will always be there, lurking, waiting for the moment to pull me back. Recently, I received a letter. There was no sender, no identifying information, just a plain envelope containing a sheet of yellowed, aged paper. The faded ink seemed to disappear even as I read it, but what was written made me freeze. Inside, along with the paper, was a key. It was identical to the one I had used for room 12. The memory of that room hit me like a wave. The mirror, the woman, the footsteps, the smell of burning. But what chilled me the most was the fact that the key felt warm in my hand, as if it had just been taken from the hotel itself. I held it for a moment and felt the same pressure in my chest, that uncomfortable sense that something was about to happen, like the gears of fate were beginning to turn again. But the strangest part was what was written on the back of the paper. Handwritten, in a shaky script, the message was simple, yet the thread it carried was unmistakable. You left the door open. I tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation, but there was none. The letter made no sense. How could anyone know what I had experienced in that room? How could anyone have access to the key I used if I'd left it behind? And more importantly, what did that sentence mean? I had left the hotel, tried to leave everything behind, and now it seemed that something was calling me back. I looked at the key again. There was no doubt. It was the same. The metal, the markings, the wear. It was the key to room 12. But how could that be? The hotel. The hotel didn't exist anymore. The feeling of being watched returned. Slowly, insidiously. Like a presence always nearby, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And suddenly I wondered, had the door ever really closed? Had I somehow left something behind? Something that should never have come out of that place? Something that was now calling me back to finish what had been interrupted? I knew I couldn't ignore the letter, the key, the message. They were pulling me back, as if I were part of a cycle that hadn't yet ended. The door was open, and I was about to cross it again. I tried to ignore it. After all, I had moved on, tried to leave the past where it belonged. But something inside me knew it would be impossible. Sometimes, in the silence of night, when the road ahead stretches long and empty, a strange feeling creeps in, as if I'm being watched. Something calls to me, even though I don't want to hear it. Every time I drive through that region, I see something in the rearview mirror. A silhouette, like a shadow that doesn't belong to the real world. It appears on the side of the road, a fleeting reflection, almost imperceptible, but always there. And always, before I can truly focus on it, it vanishes, swallowed by the dark. But the feeling stays. On other nights, I see a light blinking in the distance. Small, faint, like a beacon. It flickers on the horizon, alone, trembling in the rain or mist, as if calling me back. Always in the same place, by the roadside, where the hotel should have been. A light that somehow seems to know when I'm passing by, when I'm close enough to see it. It's as if the hotel is waiting for another tired soul, lost on the road, willing to surrender. It watches me, even without being there, like a specter of a reality that can't be erased, a memory that never fades. And deep down, I know it never truly let me go. The hotel, the key, the woman, they're all still lurking, waiting, as if caught between the pages of time, biding their moment. I try not to look. I've tried to resist, to move forward, but somehow I'm always drawn back. And sometimes, in the stillness, I hear the same question echo in my mind. What if I left the door open? Now every time that light appears, I know that the next time I look, the road will lead me back to where it all began. And this time, I'm not sure I'll be able to escape. If you've ever seen that place, or gone through something similar, tell me. Because maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one. Maybe the hotel wasn't just a creation of my mind, a hallucination fed by fear and exhaustion. Maybe it was real, or maybe it was real in a way we're not meant to understand. Because if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. The smell of rotting wood, the echo of creaking doors, the eyes in the... Every detail of that place remains, solid and indelible, as if it were woven into the fabric of reality. But only for a brief moment. A moment when the line between what is and what could be dissolves. Time, in that place, doesn't follow the same rules. And space? Space feels malleable. Something you pass through, but something that can, eventually, swallow you back. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw, and if you've experienced something like it, maybe you understand what I mean. Because somehow, the memory of that place is still alive inside me. I can't erase the images, the sounds, the sensations. They keep feeding on something, on some need, some presence. And every time I close my eyes, every time I think I've gotten away, the hotel returns like an unwanted, persistent memory. It watches me somehow, and I know, deep down, it never left. Not really. It's just waiting. And maybe, just maybe, it's still waiting for you. Because if you've seen that place, if you've also crossed that rift between worlds, then maybe you know there's something else there. Something that waits, patient and silent, for the next visitor. Something that never tires of waiting. And if you feel a chill, a strange sensation while passing through a place that seems far too familiar, maybe, just maybe, it's the hotel. The hotel that never leaves. The key is still there. And the door. It was never closed. So tell me, because if you've been there, you won't be the only one who understands. And who knows? Maybe someone is still waiting, inside, waiting for you to come in.